Good morning, everybody. The results are in. There's going to be a show today. GoJo Golic. We are going to talk about the first iteration of the college football playoff rankings, plus deadline grades. We'll talk about the trades that went down, who moved, which contenders were making big moves, plus Caleb Williams in Chicago. What the heck is going on? All that and more coming up today on GoJo Golic.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Jesse Cofield here with you guys. We are presented by Campbell's Chunky, the soup that eats like a meal, and we got a great show. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review us. Leave us a 5-star rating and check us out here live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. Fun one today. Jessica Smetana going to join us here in just a couple of minutes to talk about the College Football Playoff Committee's first round of rankings. Jason Fitz, our buddy, going to join us in hour number 2 to comb through the NFL's trade deadline that was going fast and furious yesterday, Dad. The trade deadline continues to be one of the more active times in the NFL, especially as of late, as plenty of contenders load up there. But let's get to what we saw from last night. The College Football Playoff Committee got together, the 13 folks in that room in Texas, to determine what the field was going to look like for this year's 12-team expanded playoff. So instead of what we've gotten in years past, which is a top 6 when they present the standings to us, the 4 teams that would have been in the playoff and the first 2 out, we have now got the top 14 that sort of represent those same interests here in the 12-team playoffs. No surprise, Dad. Number 1, Oregon, sitting atop the poll as they were in the AP. As we talked about yesterday, number 2, Ohio State jumps number 3, Georgia, a little bit different from the AP poll. But then the rest pretty much chalk. Miami at 4, followed by Texas, Penn State, Tennessee, Indiana, BYU, Notre Dame, Alabama, and Boise State finishing off the top 12 in the field as it currently sits. So any surprises for you, Dad, in the initial crack at this by the committee?
No, not really. I mean, to me, it was just where teams were placed. And it almost ran along the lines of the AP, right, of the AP rankings.
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of know who the top teams are. It's just what order you put them in, and it's just a miss by a variation of 1 or 2 of a difference. What it sets up for, it just sets up for you play the elimination game of who still has to play one another. Can conference champs who are outside the top 12 win a conference champ, and will there be 2 in the ACC and the Big 12, which we'll talk about? You have 2 games within the top 12 still. Obviously, Ohio State and Indiana. And then you have Tennessee and Georgia as well. So there'll be a little bit of obviously of movement there. So that's the game you play now, is if your team is in the top 12 and in a precarious position from like 6 or 7 on, have at least 1 loss, can they stay in the top 12?
Yeah, and I think the message was sent to a couple of conferences that it's going to be more difficult for you to do that than some others, as we've got 4 SEC and Big Ten teams currently in the top 12, which, if you're keeping score at home, is the exact number of automatic bids that each of these conferences has wanted to begin with in trying to force their way and force more of their teams into that final field. And if you're the Big 12 in the ACC, you've got to be feeling like you're on a bit of uneven footing, considering what some of the teams in your conference have done, the couple of losses being punished there far more severely than your counterparts. So, Dad, I think especially for the Big 12, you look at undefeated BYU sitting there behind Indiana, who we know has, also no losses on their resume, the strength of schedule much further down. They're going to have their crack at Ohio State coming up. That'll sort of be the defining game of the season. But for BYU, with the rest of the Big 12 plummeting after a loss by Iowa State this past weekend, the road to go is pretty tough for them, and they look like they're really going to have the conference's hopes on their back.
Yeah, they are. I mean, the Big 12 is going to be where it's at. I mean, can they get – so the question really is for the ACC, which we can get to in the Big 12, can they get 2 in, right? And it seems like the only way they can get 2 in is if the team outside of the top 12, like SMU in the ACC and like Iowa State or Colorado in the Big 12, were to win the conference. So let's look at the Big 12. I think where BYU was put at number 9, that puts them in a tough position. So if Iowa State or Colorado, and those are the 2 teams. By the way, we talked so much about Colorado last year and they stunk. And we don't talk about them a lot this year, and they're good and have 2 of the best players in the country and are basically one Iowa State loss away from playing in the Big 12 championship. So I think I know I have dropped the ball on them a bit. But if Iowa State or Colorado were to win the conference, they would be a top 4 seed. And I think BYU might be close enough on the outs to where if they lost, they might be knocked out of the top 12 with 1 loss, though they may hang on. So that's the only way the ACC and Big 12 are going to get 2 teams in, is if the team outside the Big 12 beats the team inside the Big 12 in the conference championship game.
All right, for more CFP breakdown here, let's bring in our buddy Jessica Smetana. You can check out over the Dan Le Batard Show, the co-host of Gen CFB. And Jess, as you've been sitting and listening to us here barf back and forth about this, what was your initial reaction to this first round of rankings? We haven't done the 12-team thing before, so how did you take this in?
Yeah, I think you guys sort of nailed it with your takeaways about the ACC and the Big 12 having, a tougher chance at getting 2 teams in. With the automatic conference, qualifier for those 2 conferences, it does make it interesting if you have a situation where, say, Miami and SMU both go into the ACC championship game undefeated in conference play, SMU with a now quality loss against BYU, and Miami faces, and Louisville's ranked, so like we put a little asterisk there, but Miami plays against, one of the toughest teams on their schedule to date, and loses. What do you do with that Miami team? And do SMU obviously would be in that scenario because they'd probably get a bye and, they're the conference champion, but who does Miami kick out at that point? But my other takeaway really is that, I understand why they start doing the rankings this early in the season. I know it's sort of late in the season now, but it's the first week of November. There's a lot of ball left to play. I like that they show the process, but there really is so much football left to play that this could look so different in a month, and especially with the conference champions being automatically in the playoff. I don't expect this to look similar at all when all is said and done after conference championship weekend.
No, I'm with you, Jess. It's hard to feel too up in arms about anything. I appreciated Greg McElroy getting fired up on behalf of BYU, feeling slighted last night on the set and trying to inject some life into this because, especially with 12 teams, Dad, Jess's point stands even more so is you've got so many teams now intertwined in the fate of how this works as opposed to just the 4 that were at or near the top before that it is going to be a pretty big churn between now and then.
But I did agree with Greg McElroy on BYU. BYU is a better strength of record than Ohio State. They've played the same quality schedule as Texas and has 2 wins against other teams ranked in the committee's top 25. That's as many as Ohio State, Texas, and Penn State, Tennessee, and Indiana combined. So I do think they got screwed a bit because just what we're talking about, the closer you are to 12, or really 11, because Boise State has to take 12 if they're ranked at 12 or lower, is you could be out with 1 loss. BYU is in a position where Could they be out if they lost in the conference championship game because they're closer to 12 than closer to 1? So I think if they were ranked like 5 or 6, they'd be in a better position if they were to lose the conference championship game to stay. But being 9th, I kind of think puts them on the edge of the cliff. So Smetty, that's why I do think the committee kind of downgraded them a little bit, and I'm not sure why.
I think what would be interesting in that scenario is like if BYU wins out, and obviously like it's very difficult to go undefeated in a college football season, no matter what conference you play in and how many top 40 teams you play. Like that's a pretty amazing feat. But if they do make it to their conference championship game and play Colorado, who's I think in 3rd place right now in the Big 12, and Colorado wins that game, they would automatically be in, despite the fact that they lost earlier this season to Nebraska, they lost to Kansas State, and BYU would have one loss to them. So yeah, I think in that scenario, it's not great if you're BYU right now. You're probably not feeling like you're very, very awesome about where the committee is putting you. I think Indiana is sort of in a similar boat. I was listening to the Cover 3 podcast, and they were breaking down Indiana's record versus Michigan's record last year at the same time, and talking about how much preseason expectations really go into this sort of thing. If you're watching Indiana blow out teams every single week and you expect them to be great going into the season, you probably have them in your top 12 right now. You're not putting them, in your like top 5 even. Like they're getting a lot more credit than they're getting. They're probably leapfrogging Penn State, who, we did have a lot of preseason expectations for, and they've struggled at times against good teams. They've struggled against a couple bad teams. We saw them struggle against Bowling Green earlier this year, although, as we know, the MAC is very competitive and we should all respect MACtion teams. But yeah, Penn State's sitting at 7 right now, and they have a loss to Ohio State. And I think the other thing that's really frustrating is, it's one thing to like watch the rankings come out. It's another thing when you read the full Q&A with the college football playoff selection committee and get through some of the reasoning. It can get a little hairy. It's a little tough sometimes to read through, like, well, we put Penn State higher because they have a really good tight end. Well, they didn't really use him very much against Ohio State, so I don't think that should really matter too much. That was like one of the 4 bullet points and why Penn State was still up there despite losing. It's like, it was a really back and forth game against Ohio State. Was it? I don't know if that they did spot Ohio State, a couple points, or like Ohio State spotted them a couple points early on, and then there was not much after that. So again, like, I understand why they put out the rankings this early in the season, but we're kind of splitting hairs until we've seen all 12 games get played.
If you want to check up on the organizational health for the Big Ten and the SEC, look at the fact that Penn State and Tennessee are ranked now where they are. Now, Tennessee at least can point to the Alabama win and say good quality, top 12 win, top 11 win that they can have there. Penn State, the win against West Virginia at the beginning of the season, cool. Going through their Big Ten schedule, cool. And then the minute they have to play a good team, they go and it looks exactly like last year. And so I do struggle with that. Some Indiana is the ultimate reminder, though, Jess. And I think for a lot of these teams, and as we talk about the other team in Indiana, Notre Dame, who's in the top 10, the committee can say that margin of victory is not something they incentivize, but there's a metric called game control that's essentially that. And I do think the fact that Indiana, despite having the worst strength of schedule of any team that's in the running for this right now, has gone out and blown out every team and been firmly in the driver's seat in every game, has resonated with a lot of these people who are also predisposed to, I think, like offense to a certain extent. If you do one thing really well, the committee does seem to reward that in terms of, hey, vibes, we'll find a reason.
Oh, 100%. I also think Indiana is sort of a victim to how difficult it is to really quantify a new head coach coming in with a boatload of transfers. When you look at them before the season starts, when you look at them before the season starts, you're not seeing a ton of returning starters. You're seeing a, pretty decent transfer quarterback from Ohio come in, and you're not really expecting Indiana to be great in year one with Kurt Cignetti. That has obviously not been the case. Like you said, game control there has been pretty solid. They've been huge, but I do think that it will really, really matter how they play against Michigan this weekend. I know they're like a 14.5-point favorite right now, but if that's a game where they easily cover the spread and continue to not only, beat teams, but not trail the whole season. Last weekend was the first weekend they've trailed any team all year against Michigan State. I do think that will give them a nice little boost. So we'll probably not see the same, lack of respect on next Tuesday.
Yeah, and I would say this, Dan, I firmly believe Indiana belongs right where they are. Jess's point about where they started the season is well served. But you watch that team, that is a top 10 team. That's a borderline top 5 team in the way that they've played so far this season.
Well, I mean, and the question will be, obviously, they get their chance against Ohio State, right? I mean, that's November 23rd. They get, if they win it, they'll play Oregon in the Big Ten championship, and no questions asked that they're going to be in. The question will be if they lose to Ohio State, and how do they lose to Ohio State, right? How is it a close game? Is it a blowout? When they hit the upper echelon, do they not do well? So that's going to be the big. At least it's on the field. At least for, again, Tennessee, Georgia on the field. Alabama, LSU on the field. Loser is going to be out in that case. Texas A&M and Texas on the field. So, you're getting in Georgia, Tennessee, and Iowa, or Indiana and Ohio State on the field. You're getting these tests on the field, which are going to clear up a lot of things. The committee will have an easy decision with the teams that are ranked in the top 12 or the top 14 when they play one another.
Jess, let's talk about our alma mater briefly. Notre Dame
please.
checking in at number 10.
We waited so long to talk about Notre Dame. This is ridiculous. I thought this was Golic and GoJo.
I know. We showed remarkable restraint. We are unbiased journalists here getting ready to discuss this very level-headedly as I get set to head back to South Bend to watch them play Florida State this weekend. Jess, Army, we know the only ranked team left on their schedule, checking in barely by a fingernail at number 5 despite being undefeated. No margin of error for this point from Notre Dame from here on out, right?
Yeah, for sure. Notre Dame obviously not in a conference, so they're not going to be eligible for one of the bye weeks. But I think that also means that they're not going to get a top 5, top 6, top 7 matchup to finish out the schedule like some of these teams will. Which even if you lose one of those games, it appears that you might still be in good shape if you're in the Big Ten or the SEC. So yeah, Notre Dame, I think from probably the moment the final whistle of the Northern Illinois game happened, Notre Dame knew, you got to win out and just hope that the rest of the field has a little bit of attrition. And so far that has been the case. I mean, we're going to see a lot of these teams play against each other. We're going to see Alabama and LSU this weekend. And so definitely helps for Notre Dame to have won at Texas A&M. Definitely good that Louisville has continued to play well. And beating Clemson was, I think, huge for Notre Dame. Navy, we believed in you, but Navy couldn't overcome the dreaded 5-hour rain delay against Rice last weekend, so they're out of it. But the committee did mention that they did like that Navy win, and it was a dominant win. It was a 37-point win. So Notre Dame has to just kind of take care of business. You got Florida State, Virginia, Army, and of course a road trip to USC, which USC would love to ruin Notre Dame's season every year. That's all they've got really left. So that's not a cakewalk by any means. They just got to win out, though.
And making the switch to Jordan Mailata, the backup quarterback, who was the transfer over from UNLV now, so you've got a little bit of a wild card dad to end the season.
The issue for Notre Dame is if they win out, should be in. But as we talked about with the ACC and the Big 12, if the teams outside the top 12 beat the teams inside the top 12, those conferences could get 2 teams in each. And if you get 2 teams outside the top 12 now automatically getting bids, 2 teams are going to get pushed out who are in the top 12. Who's at 10 and 11 because Boise State will have 12. Is Notre Dame going to stay at 10 or 11, or will Tennessee, if they lose to Georgia, drop below them? So if ACC and Big 12 get 2 teams in, 2 teams are going to get pushed out who are at the back end. And let's hope, as all Notre Dame grads here, that Notre Dame is not that team.
Yeah, certainly going to be a lot to watch, but as Jess mentioned, this is going to look markedly different very soon as this thing rolls along. Smetty, we always appreciate the time, buddy. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I could argue about it for hours, but there's no point. Let's just wait and see what happens this weekend.
Yeah.
Exactly. It feels good to shake off the cobwebs, though, and get it going a little bit this early in the morning. So nice to get a little bit of CFP action in here. Coming up next, we'll do the next best thing for the NFL. NFL trade deadline grades here on GoJo and Golic. Let's go.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Jesse Cofield, Mike Golic Jr. and Mike Golic Sr. here. Now, not to be outdone by college football, the NFL's trade deadline was yesterday. Few big names moving, few contenders making moves. So the biggest being Marshawn Lattimore to the Commanders. Window is open in Washington with Daniels on a rookie deal, guys, but they know what happened last time they had a rookie QB. So, going all in to take advantage of the good start. Do you feel that this was the biggest move of the deadline? What's your take?
I think so, Dad. Of the moves that we saw yesterday, now we'll have a larger conversation that lumps in the trades that got made by the Buffalo Bills for Amari Cooper and the Kansas City Chiefs for DeAndre Hopkins. But of the moves made right before the deadline happened yesterday, I do think this one was the player with the most still left to give in terms of ability, who, Ben Solak did a great article over at ESPN.com the other day talking about the Saints' nightmare salary cap situation and where Marshawn Lattimore fit into that. And he was one of the guys that he believed, hey, if the Saints had kept and actually reworked some of his deal to try and smooth the cap situation, would have been worth it given the quality of football that he's still playing. And so this is exciting for the Commanders because they got a quality player, Dad, but also think about this time last year when both Chase Young and Montez Sweat were guys that the Commanders were selling at the deadline, trading off to other teams as the ship appeared to be sinking there. A total vibe shift from year to year, and this marker in time is kind of a great way to signify that.
Yeah, there was definitely more offensive players than defensive players. As a matter of fact, there were, 6 wide receivers, 4 pre-deadline, and then 2 on the deadline, Mingo to the Cowboys and Mike Williams to the Steelers. So the defense side of the ball only had a few. Lattimore was certainly a good one to help that defense. Tre'Davious White going to the Ravens, not sure. He had the Achilles and hasn't really come back to what we knew of Tre'Davious White at the Bills.
Yeah.
But they needed help in the secondary from giving up big plays, so we'll see. Along with Lattimore, I would say Zadarius Smith going from Cleveland to the Lions. I mean, who had lost Aiden Hutchinson. Zadarius Smith has 5.5 sacks this year, or last year had 5.5 with Cleveland. The year before had 10 with Minnesota. Just played one game in 21. In 19 and 20, he had 25 sacks in those 2 years with Green Bay. I know he's in his 10th year, but I think the dudes can still bring pressure. Has had 5 sacks in Cleveland already this year, and they need help getting pressure on the quarterback. And it's a team that needed to bolster, kind of like Kansas City needed to bolster the wide receiver position because of injury. This was because of injury. I think Zadarius Smith was a very good pickup.
I would agree. It's a guy, sack percentage kind of down relative to the last few years for him. But to your point, the numbers are still there. And I went and looked because I was curious. Coming over here, you obviously won't have Myles Garrett opposite you anymore, which helps everybody. As you know,
right.
Being a former defensive lineman, having a space alien like that to occupy attention can go a long way. But when you look at the double team rates so far this year, nearly identical for Zadarius Smith and for Myles Garrett. So he's faced his fair share of double teams already. He's going to get plenty of those as a guy that walks in with the most pass rushing cachet of the edge guys in Detroit right now, but still been very productive on a defense, Dad. And I think the other part of this is culture-wise, what Aaron Glenn has put together there, really an understanding. We've watched him morph his defensive style around what they've had available after Aiden was injured. So he's going to put him in great position to go out there and be effective early. And man, just in general, if you're Zadarius Smith, you go from the Browns team that's been the doormat for the league this season, been falling apart around you, to now a legitimate Super Bowl contender and the current best team in the NFL. That guy had to be doing cartwheels down the street to Detroit.
Oh, just like Lattimore, who spent his entire career with New Orleans, but I mean, that's time for them to make some major changes. So he got out of there. Another interesting move, and again, it's a team that didn't really do a lot they did more than Dallas in the running game. But the Bengals getting Khalil Herbert from the Bears. DeAndre Swift is obviously the main running back there. Zach Moss has basically got beaten out by Chase Brown in Cincinnati, but they needed to bolster that running game, needed help on the defense as well. But I think that was a pretty good move for them to help bolster the running game to aid. They obviously live and die with the pass, but having a better running game certainly isn't going to hurt.
No, certainly not. And you mentioned, passed up really by 2 running backs there. Roschon Johnson, the, I believe, second-year player out of Texas, was another one that had climbed over him on the depth chart. We know Khalil Herbert had been a big play merchant for them for a while in the offense when it was led by Justin Fields. So if you can recapture even a little bit of that, that's a move where everyone involved seemed willing to make it happen. So of the ones that we've seen from the top-end teams, Dad, I would probably be with you that looking at the group we mentioned, Zadarius Smith to the Lions is the one to me that feels like, hey, while it's a player that's certainly on the wrong side age-wise, I think he's 32, going on 33, something in that range.
Yeah.
He's going to a team that has a defined need, and he's still been a productive player. And so I think for that reason, that's probably my favorite move of the deadline. The other that goes completely opposite of that, the Dallas Cowboys cryptically teasing a move for a wide receiver they really liked in the draft, and then going and pulling Jonathan Mingo out of the Carolina Panthers for a 4th-round pick and acting as if that is going to appease the masses in Dallas is awfully rich for the all-in team that's been all-in on absolutely nothing so far this season.
Yeah, that I mean, you just have to kind of look at the Cowboys and shake your head at the lack of what they did in the offseason. Obviously, they had some injuries, but the play hasn't been good. And then this is your move? I mean, this is the move? I don't get it. But you know what? They're not going to contend. So you just continue to scratch your head at them. I thought the 2 pickups, you look at a team contending in the AFC North, the Steelers, I thought those 2 pickups were so-so. Mike Williams. Now, listen, they need help with the receiving position. George Pickens leads the way, and then it's Freiermuth, the tight end, and then there's a significant drop-off. So we'll see what he can help there. Preston Smith, his snaps have gone down this year, has 2.5 sacks this year. He's gone to 54% of the snaps, down from 80% in 22 and 66% last year. So I thought those moves were okay. Not like a DeAndre Hopkins or not like a Zadarius Smith, where I think you can those two will be focal points. I think these would just kind of be add-ons in Pittsburgh.
I would agree. I still think that for Pittsburgh Steelers fans, you wanted to see something in that receiver room now that your offense is clearly catering to that part of the game again. You would have liked to have been in on a guy like DeAndre Hopkins and some of the other names. Obviously, Deontay Johnson was going to be a non-starter given your guys' team history with him, but for these other receivers, they would have been guys I'm sure Steelers fans would have much preferred to Mike Williams, who we know the book on Mike Williams at this point. Incredible athlete, insane catch radius, but a guy who does struggle to stay on the field consistently and stay healthy. I saw Pat McAfee had Aaron Rodgers on as that trade news broke yesterday and talked about what Mike would bring to that Steelers wide receiver room. So I'm with you, Dad. They only go so far, those moves. And quite honestly, the Preston Smith one, you're going into a pass rushing stable in that outside linebacker group that really doesn't need a ton of help. These are for teams that are trying to load up for a playoff run, just adding bodies on the places where you get a ton of value at that time. If you can get a couple of big catches, if you can get a sack or two as you get at or near the postseason, then it all seems worth it.
Yeah, the thing I'll say about Pittsburgh is they do, obviously, with T.J. Watt and with Highsmith and with Herbert, but Herbert and Highsmith have only played 5 games each, so they've missed a few games where TJ has played them all. So I could see them making that move because those guys have, but when those guys are all healthy and you know, that's been a bit of an issue this year, they may have the best edge rushing, you know, trio in the league. I mean, those guys are fantastic. But again, 2 of them have missed a few games.
Sure. And, I mean, listen, T.J. Watt plays such a high snap percentage that if you can give him any breaks at all down the stretch of this season, where now you look poised to be a playoff team in the current AFC structure, then all the better for you. Jesse, as the, I guess, the one who'd be the teacher in this class full of idiots here, is it time that we start handing out grades for the trade deadline?
Yes, it is. Okay. So we're going to go here. Who gets the top marks? And this is, like you said, like look at it from like maybe a little bit of a bigger picture here. So the trades that happened before, not just what we saw happen yesterday.
Yeah, so we'll zoom back out, Dad, and say that everyone that made the moves into the lead up to this, so we'll include, obviously, the Lions, the Chiefs, the Buffalo Bills, that all made moves to bring players over in the last few weeks to try and bolster this roster. Who made your favorite move in the lead up to the deadline?
Well, I mean, I think we've already seen the production from DeAndre Hopkins, right? We saw that come to fruition on Monday night. So I think just out of seeing him play already, out of the sum that I thought Cam Robinson with the Vikings. Now that was a trade, but that was a necessary one. Obviously before the deadline. I thought even though he had been struggling, he got benched in Jacksonville. I just called the first game he did with the Vikings. He actually blocked pretty well in that game. But I would definitely say DeAndre Hopkins because he's already shown it. Then I would go to Zadarius Smith going to the Lions. I do think he's going to help in an area where they really need help. So I would say the Chiefs and the Lions were at the top. Then I look at the Bills getting Amari Cooper, Commanders getting Lattimore. That's kind of the way I would go down. I wouldn't have the Cowboys listed at all. The Ravens, again, I'm not sure on that one.
That's the one I'm most curious about, Dad, is what happens with Deontay Johnson there. Because it's different. Like DeAndre Hopkins had to come in and ball. They need him because it's been a mash unit at wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs. And we saw the benefits so early in game 2 of having a go-to option. Even if we don't think at this age, DeAndre Hopkins is going to give them that kind of insane production each and every game. That's probably not realistic to expect. But for the Ravens, it's going to be interesting because Deontay Johnson doesn't have to be the first or even second best receiver.
Right.
And quite honestly, even third when you throw now what's happened at tight end now that Mark Andrews is playing more like himself again. So in the role that he's asked to play, we'll see if a guy who has certainly been, you could label disgruntled going back to his time in Pittsburgh, now all of a sudden gets to a healthier environment with an MVP quarterback and finds the best of himself again.
That's a luxury, I think, for the Ravens to get Deontay Johnson because they don't have to count on him. So whatever production they get is going to be a plus. Tre'Davious White's going to be the interesting one to me because that's been the negative part of this team is giving up the big play, giving up the chunk big plays from the secondary. And I just don't know about Tre'Davious White. I don't know what he has left again coming, off that Achilles injury.
Yeah, based off what we've seen in Los Angeles, which is a decided turn in their season that's certainly tied to the return of Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua before the punch that got thrown in this last game. But it's also been subbing in a lot of these young guys in the back end of a secondary that's maybe not as top-end production great, but has been turning the ball over. Where Trey White, we saw him get picked on in some games earlier this season. So I don't know if that's going to be the full answer there necessarily, but they're trying with what's on the board. Again, I think a lot of people that might fall victim to just the sticker of, oh, wow, it's Tre'Davious White, a name that we know, who the last time we remember talking about him is still good. I feel like we hold on to that capital for too long and don't really upgrade the software of what's real with that player. So it is going to be interesting how that goes with them.
I'm just happy we're talking about the trade deadline again, for the last few years because it had been such a non-issue. Now, I don't think anybody here is going to contribute like Christian McCaffrey did to San Francisco and TJ Hawkinson did to Minnesota when they were first traded. Both, obviously, CMC is still not played yet this year, and TJ Hawkinson just came off injured reserve for the game I called Sunday. In their win, and they started putting him in to the lineup. But as far as immediate results, those two were phenomenal with immediate results. And like I said, we've seen DeAndre Hopkins have some immediate results for the Chiefs.
Yeah, I think this trade line can just as much be about the players that weren't dealt. You look at Chase Young down in New Orleans as a player that people looked at pass rusher. Certainly the young quarterbacks, Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis based on him being benched recently. Bryce Young in the up and down season that we've seen for the Carolina Panthers. Both players that you figured people were going to pick up the phone and kick the tires on, and both staying with their respective organizations for right now. So, again, the winners of the trade deadline are likely going to be teams that were already winning because people that get to operate from the vantage point of we're already good and we're just supplementing a few needs or supplementing for injury that we have to overcome now are always going to be in the best position. So congratulations to the Lions, the Chiefs, and the Ravens for still being good. Coming up next, though, let's try this one out. Trouble in Paradise? What's going on with one of the Bears' star wide receivers next?
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Jesse Cofield, Mike Golic Jr. and Mike Golic Sr. here with you guys. So, a second straight loss for the Bears dropped them back into the basement of the NFC North. 4-4, okay? So normally a team with a record like that and a rookie quarterback, we'd be like, okay, we're heading in the right direction, am I right? But things actually seem to be falling apart in Chicago. Not great. Things are bad in Paradise, okay? DJ Moore took a lot of heat for walking off the field, sitting on the bench during a play on Sunday, and here he is on Monday during a radio hit.
Wonder from the outside, has Matt Eberflus lost his football team? So I'll ask you, has Matt Eberflus lost his football team?
I don't want to say no. The message yesterday was that we know we're 4-4 now. It's just like being 0-0. But you just got to go out there and start stacking wins how we did. And that's the best thing we can do is win and then let the chips fall how they fall after we do so.
Okay, so it's kind of hard to tell what he's saying. Is he saying, I want to say no or I don't want to say no? But either way, it's not great.
Yeah, that appearance on Bernstein and Holmes on 670 The Score. Yeah, dead. Either way, like, no matter how you slice it, it's not a ringing endorsement of this current locker room situation. And to the point of the two-game slide, we kind of all said, hey, watch out for this, because the stretch that they had success with, the stretch where the offense finally looked like it started to click, also coincided with facing the Rams, the Panthers, and the Jags, like three very accessible defensive secondaries that have made most quarterbacks look good over the course of this season. But now you're clearly seeing an offense where Caleb Williams is throwing as many off-target throws as anyone in the NFL in terms of quarterbacks. Some of the frustration growing in that receiver room, and a guy in DJ Moore who is very much wearing it both on the field and in front of the media.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Rams team, that they played the Rams when the Rams didn't have Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp on the offensive side as well. And I do think he said, I want to say no, but still not a ringing no. He has not lost the team. I mean, that wasn't a ringing like positive answer. Listen, the defense is playing, top 10-ish, just outside the top 10-ish. Especially against the pass, not against the run, though. Offensively, we talk about, and I wonder how much should go on Shane Waldron coming over from Seattle. How much goes on Caleb? We have to remember Caleb Williams is a rookie. I know he started out a 48 in the win against Tennessee, completing just 48% of his passes, but then 62, 63, 79, 69, 79. But his last 2 weeks games were like Anthony Richardson-like at 41% and 53%. No touchdowns, no interception, was sacked 9 times in the last 2 games as well. He is spreading the ball out. DJ has 37 receptions, Kmet 27, Rome 25, Donde Swift 25, Keenan Allen 21. So they are spreading it out, but they just, 4-2 to 4-4. I wouldn't say that the sky is falling yet. I just think maybe too high of expectations were put on this team in the beginning. That can add to it. We thought this team was going to be through the roof. Everybody was just lauding Caleb Williams, saying, oh, he is going to be so worth the number 1 pick. And he very well may be, but he's 8 games into his rookie year. But again, we saw C.J. Stroud last year. We're seeing Jaden Daniels this year. We've seen some quarterbacks produce at a high level, but they're the exception. I just think this is based off of that expectations were too high at the beginning of the year for Chicago.
Caleb Williams, this is Dan Orlovsky tweet, has more off-target throws, 58, than any quarterback in the NFL right now. He had 9 more on Sunday. I saw Chris Long the other day pull the stat from Twitter that 3 of the top 10 receivers with the most off-target passes coming their way are the Bears' 3 receivers in Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Rome Odunze. And Rome Odunze and Caleb Williams at least start to have a little bit of a groove going right now. But DJ Moore sounds like a guy who's fed up. He got his money this offseason, and now he's going through a year where it's not looking the way he wanted to, and that might be frustration with the quarterback, because again, on that play, it looked like he might have tweaked something walking off the field there, Dad, but if you're someone that believes in the situation and fighting for that, that's probably not the response of someone who's a gruntled employee in this position, regardless of, we'll see how bad it was hurt, if it was hurt at all, or what the situation was there. But that, to me, did not look like the response of someone who's really pumped to be where they are. And this goes back to my chief fear coming into the season, Dad, because the other factor that we talk about in the situation like C.J. Stroud last year, in the situation like Jaden Daniels this year, is coaching. And at some point, that's going to be the thing that gets looked at here. The Bears flirted with cleaning house last year and didn't. And if it continues the way it's going now, they're going to clean house this year, and they're going to have wasted year 1 of Caleb Williams, the quarterback they were always going to take, more than likely at number 1. I know there were thoughts about keeping Justin Fields and moving that pick, but I don't ever know how realistic that was. And so I do think now what becomes interesting, and I saw yesterday people talking about, rumors that Ben Johnson actually was interested in the Bears job last year if it had become open, and what it looks like for him now going forward, as we're going to get to another offseason where he's going to be a highly prized guy. I think if you're Chicago, this is going to be the area you're most focused on in the home stretch of the season. Caleb's going to be here, and I still think he is talented enough to be all the things that we want him to be. I don't know if we can say the same about Matt Eberflus, and we say it all the time. We're never rooting for anybody to get fired, but at this point, the hire he made at offensive coordinator not working out, this offense really has no semblance of an identity right now, and that's going to fall in the lap of the head coach as well.
Yep, I agree. And we don't know what Caleb Williams will be at. He very, very well may be a huge success, but I think, like the team, he was oversold at the beginning of the year, and he's a rookie. And let me tell you, they're going to be tested. Now, they have the Patriots this week, who are a better football team than they were, but still a 2-win team. Then they go through their division. They play the Packers, then they play the Vikings, then on a short week on a Thursday, they play the Lions. Then they play the 49ers, then they play the Vikings again, then the Lions. I mean, it is a murderer's row the next handful or so of games that they're playing, where they seem to be questioning quite a bit. So they're sitting at 4-4. Here's a great now test of what direction is this team going in. Can they pull off some of the wins against the teams that are ahead of them? Can they show improvement going forward for the rest of the season? This is a stretch that's certainly going to test that theory.
The Patriots are a game they have to win. This has to be a win, given where the Patriots are at right now, because the next 3 look like they could be losses. And, Dad, if you're looking for an area, if the Bears were going to potentially make a move, they play that Lions team on Thanksgiving. Everyone's sitting at home watching them as the noon 30 game on Thanksgiving. If Detroit goes out there and plucks the wings off Chicago after they've just gotten buried by the rest of the division in the lead up to that, and you've got them the mini bye coming off that before the next weekend, that could very well be the spot where we see the Bears wave goodbye to their head coach and start to get a jump start on whatever the future is going to be, likely a very offensive-minded head coach for their star young quarterback.
Yep, that's where you'll see it with 3, 4, 5 weeks left in the season. You would, if for those coaches that are on the hot seat and on the bubble, that you may see them get ousted. Again, that gives the team that fired the coach the right to actively search for a head coach, because you can't search for a head coach if you have a head coach. An interim head coach, again, doesn't count. So you kind of get a jump on searching for your next coach. So that's kind of when moves are going to be made, when you're going to want to make a change, because you don't want to be last at making a change and behind the 8 ball. So I'm with you. It's a tough stretch. I don't have high hopes for the Bears in this tough stretch.
No, I don't either. And again, we don't want people to lose their jobs. I have no ill will towards Matt Eberflus whatsoever or Shane Waldron. It's just the reality of the situation and the difficulties and the extra expectation that come with when you're handed the number 1 overall pick. And quite honestly, when you're handed another top 10 pick, as we know Justin Fields was. Now, he wasn't the pick for Matt Eberflus. There was a coaching change before that. History potentially repeating itself in Chicago in a way that's got to make Bears fans pretty nervous. Jesse, we've talked about this. Dad, quickly, we didn't get to it with you. What did you make of DJ Moore walking off the field on that game? You're someone that played 9 years in this league, someone who had to fight tooth and nail for your spot on the field each and every time. What did you feel watching him walk off the field in that moment and go sit down on the bench?
Listen, just not a fan of it. I'm just not a fan. You're out on the field. You know, I know emotions get the best of people sometimes on the field, but it's kind of like when Anthony Richardson for the Colts tapped out of a play. It's just kind of an eyebrow raiser when you're on the field fighting tooth and nail and you see someone walk off the field. It's just not a good look. And, you know, you talk about you're all in this together, win or lose, you're battling together, you do it together, you're as I said, you don't sing Kumbaya with everybody, but on the field, you're locked arms with your teammates, you know, all fighting tooth and nail together. And to see someone just kind of walk off is not a good look.
The vibes there certainly feel different than Jesse. Something else we heard yesterday that I wanted to get to from Marlon Humphrey and the Baltimore Ravens, talking about the locker room that sounds unified here. This Ravens group, even with some of the struggles they've had on defense, certainly sounds like just that.
Yeah, you love to see this. I know, Senior, you're going to like to hear this, but he, took to the media and defended Zach Orr from some of the criticism that he's been hearing.
I haven't seen a lot, but I do know there feel like there's been some chatter. And for me as a player, knowing what's going on, I hate seeing coaches get under scrutiny when it's the player's fault. You know, if I felt that there was, this ain't being coached this way, right? This ain't being this ain't being this. It's a little different, but it really sucks when the product we're putting out there isn't what we're being coached, isn't what we're practicing.
Oh, so instead of coming out and saying something disparaging, we got a player coming out taking some responsibility. Senior, do you feel like your palate has been cleansed?
I absolutely love this. Listen, we talk about coaches on the hot seat, from coordinators to head coaches, because they're the easy out. They're the easy change that you can make. You can't change your whole team. You certainly can change some of it, but for the most part, the easy change is the coaches, though some teams go a little too crazy with that. But when the talk comes up of Belichick and Brady, both obviously walk-in Hall of Famers, of who do you put more responsibility on? As I've always said, coaches can draw up a game plan, but players have to go out and execute it. Players are the ones that, I talk about my years at Notre Dame. People say Jerry Faust, who was that first-time head coach, came from high school as a head coach, was in over his head. And I say, yeah, he struggled as a head coach, but we on the field missed the tackles. We on the field didn't get the blocks. We on the field dropped the passes. We on the field did not execute. And I will always put, and I'm glad to see Marlon Humphrey doing that, always put more emphasis on the player not executing the game plan on the field, because game plans aren't new. Nobody's reinventing the wheel out here on a game plan. It's a chess match on play calls. I get it, from offense and defense. But as I've always said, and I will continue to say, we can talk as new school or as old school as you want, it's about one-on-one battles. Are you beating the man over you? If you are, there's a good chance that if you're doing it in the majority, a good chance you're going to win. If you're not, it's a good chance you're going to lose. So I am very happy to hear a player take the responsibility and say, hey, it's on us to execute the game plan that goes out there, but not on the coach. But the coach is always the easy mark.
Yeah, and listen, I disagree slightly. Not, again, you're ultimately right. Football is a very simple game that we make complicated at times. I do think coordinators like Mike McDonald last year presented a decided advantage in the way that he pulled the strings on that defense. Still ultimately led by ball-in players, some of whom left the building, by the way. That's the other part of the Ravens scheme that we don't talk about, is they had talented players at every level of that defense that left this offseason. So personnel-wise, it did get a little bit worse. The thing that encourages me, though, about this, and what I take most from this soundbite, is Marlon Humphrey plays in the position group that has been most affected by this change. The Ravens' deep passing defense has come under fire as much as anything. And so if anyone could come out and feel some type of way and try and blame coaching or anybody else, and could, someone in the Baltimore secondary that was a part of a unit that was great last year could absolutely try and pull that. Marlon Humphrey is tenured enough in this league, and he still said, no, I've got our coaches back because we believe in him. And I think that goes a long way in helping me believe, looking at this Ravens team, Dad, hey, this is their Achilles heel right now, but they've got the right parts to work it out.
the end of the day, coaches can put you in a better position to win. They can put you in a tough position. I get it. It all works hand in hand. But like I said, I'm glad he said it, that I still say the higher percentage goes to the players executing on the field.
Yeah, people talk about that C-word culture all the time. That's locker room culture. That's what it looks like right there when everybody is working hand in hand with the other. Coming up next, we'll work hand in hand with Jason Fitz as he joins us in hour number 2 next.
All right, coming up, guys, we're going to dive into the first college football playoff rankings with Jason Fitz, who will join the program. But a quick look at the championship odds on the DraftKings Sportsbook. So Ohio State, the favorite to win it all at plus 330. That's above Georgia and Oregon at plus 425. Alabama still in the mix there at plus 1,600. That's above Penn State. And, fellas, it is above Notre Dame as well. Now, Ole Miss, the highest odds for a team outside the top 12. A lot of love for the SEC in the odds. Will that sort itself out? So maybe some value in other contenders? Perhaps. We're going to break it all down more with Jason Fitz, who will join the program. That is coming up next on GoJo and Golic.
this could go one of two ways, because I feel like if there's one person, as we've talked about the first round of college football playoff rankings, and Dad, I don't know about you, I found myself as someone that's worked in sports talk, not certainly as long as you now, but going on a decade, really having a hard time getting fired up about anything that I saw last night. And so I'm counting on Jason Fitz here, my former co-host in the college football rankings reaction at ESPN back in the day, the current host of the college football power hour over at Yahoo Sports, to provide some sort of spark. Because if anyone can do it, Fitzy, I feel like it's you.
Yeah, look, we've done this for a long time. Like, this is no joke. We were getting on the Power Hour a few weeks ago, and I started breaking down strength of resume and going through remaining strength of schedule and all this stuff. And Adam Brenneman, my co-host on that show, at one point was like, man, you were really locked into what the committee does. That's when I realized, Mike, that together you and I have covered the college football playoff committee for 8 years. Like, at this point, if we aren't pretty smart on what happens in this process, then we're pretty stupid. Like, it's just, you kind of know what's laid out.
You guys have been doing it a long time from Mike, your house in West Hartford, Connecticut, where you would do the rankings reaction show from the couch. Yeah, you guys have nailed this for years, and you're right, Mike. It's tough to really. The first one is about positioning, right? Because as we had Smetty on, at the beginning of the show, so much stuff, Jason, is going to change. So really, to me, you just kind of look at the positioning of where the committee put teams to kind of let you know what they think of teams. And I think BYU was the odd team out in this, even though they're in the top 12, which is where they got ranked. But where a team may ascend or slide given their schedule the rest of the way.
Well, but here's the thing, guys. Like, we always look at the first college football playoff ranking and say, what did we learn about this committee? I don't know that we've really learned much about this committee because there wasn't a consistency across the board. Like, I do believe this committee values the eye test. That's the only way you can explain Army being number 25 undefeated Army, where undefeated Indiana comes in, probably about right, but undefeated BYU feels like they're a little bit low. Like, everybody, there is this moment of just, are they just relying on, well, my gut tells me this team would beat this team. So I think it's strange to me, but Senior, when you talk about where these teams are ranked, they have left a very clear path for Ole Miss. They've left a very clear path for Texas A&M. They've left a very clear path for LSU. Like, they've told you that even though I think the SEC is this sort of cluster that's going to end up really cannibalizing itself even more, they're giving an opportunity for the teams that will cause that cannibalization to move right back into it. Like, it's almost like they're force feeding us 4 SEC teams in this process.
Well, and Fitz, I think that's the thing is, if we're looking for takeaways, the first ranking to me is a lot about how these committee members view each conference. And it's abundantly clear. Big Ten, the biggest winner of this one, having Ohio State jump Georgia, which might feel like a small thing. In the AP poll, it was the only thing that was really different discernibly about these top 10s. But that, to me, is indicative of they really think Oregon is that good, where that close road loss by Ohio State, coupled with the Penn State win, puts them nipping right at their heels and is better than a Georgia team who, yes, has the close loss to Alabama where they look great in the second half, and then the dismantling of Texas. But that, to me, coupled with the fact that each of those conferences has 4 teams in, which you'd expect, by the way. They've got the bulk of the football teams. Like, to some extent, this is a math problem, but where they've slotted and how high teams like Tennessee and Penn State are indicative that these conferences are as well respected as they want you to believe they are.
And also, everything you just said is true. They obviously value, you and I have talked about quality losses so much. I hate that phrase. That, like, there's very little that just makes me want to just throw my coffee at somebody. And I just want to walk up to the committee one day and just pound my fist on the desk and say, don't force quality losses down my throat. But also, I think they showed you that they're not pleased with bad losses. It doesn't matter the margin. It's just a bad loss. Like, I think Tennessee really got dinged for a loss to Arkansas that doesn't make a lot of sense. Whereas, obviously, and you could argue Tennessee obviously has some better wins than a team like Penn State, but Penn State has the better loss. So, like, they definitely showed you what they think about certain losses in this process. And I hate that. Like, I hate that we're sitting there quantifying, well, this loss was to a good team and this loss was an okay team, and we're going to sort of penalize this. Like, it gets wildly just hard to figure out what they value if we're going to sit here and have to quantify all the losses that way.
Yeah, unfortunately, they were right about the Notre Dame loss. That was a bad loss, no doubt about it. Jason, I'm wondering if Greg Sankey, the commissioner of the SEC, and Tony Petitti, the commissioner of the Big Ten, are like, see, this is exactly how it should be. There's 4 Big Ten teams, there's 4 SEC teams, there's 1 ACC, 1 Big 12, 1 independent, and 1 group of 5 being the Mountain West. That this is how the game plan should be.
Yes. But they say that today. What are we going to say when this whole thing is over? Because this is the one thing. Like, for me, I look at the NCAA men's and women's basketball tournaments. We always talk about bid thieves. Okay, so right now you got a team in the 20s in Colorado that's playing really good football. Colorado, let's just have an imaginary scenario where Colorado, who doesn't have much left on their schedule that will really vault them, but let's say that they get into that Big 12 championship game and they beat BYU. That's not going to vault suddenly Colorado into the top 12 likely, but it would put them in as an automatic top 4 seed in the playoffs. And look, if we want to talk about Boise State, group of 5, let's say, we all know my UNLV fandom. Let's say UNLV does the impossible and beats them in the Mountain West. Well, then all of a sudden now that group of 5 school is going to come from where? Is it going to come from the armed forces? Like, how is that going to look? So right now, Greg Sankey is happy with this. Right now, both mega conferences are happy with this. But what happens when a team like Alabama gets left out of the college football playoff because Colorado did the unthinkable and won the Big 12, and now they got to find room for a team that's not in the top 12 to be in the college football playoff? That's when everyone's going to start screaming.
Well, that's the weirdest scenario you presented, Fitz, is if something like that happens. And the Big 12 is the likely culprit for that, given the fact that BYU, despite being undefeated and having that win against SMU, is ranked where they are behind a team like Indiana. Sort of indicates the uphill battle that they've got there. And if that happens, and let's say Boise State keeps winning the way they do, they have a game against Oregon State at the end of the year. They're going to have the Mountain West Conference Championship. If they win and they're ranked higher than the Big 12 champion, they get the bye. Like, it's the 5 highest ranked group of 5 or the 5 highest ranked conference champions that get the automatic bid, right? But the 4 highest ranked conference champions get that first round bye. And I think that was something that, as last night, ESPN kind of tried to unveil, hey, this is what the bracket's going to look like at the same time that they're handing out the top 25 rankings. The thing they didn't have to explore yet is what you just described there, because Boise State was sitting there at 12 in the field, is what's going to happen and what are the feelings going to be like if someone does get bumped out of this for a group of 5 team or for a bid thief like you talked about there. Of the teams outside of the top 12 right now, Fitz, as we get a little bit further down the pecking order, they do the first 2 out. And this time around, it was SMU and Texas A&M. But as you look there, LSU, we know a big game this weekend, Ole Miss still lurking. Who are you most looking at down the stretch that could either influence the season or wind up in the dance themselves?
Look, A&M's got a very clear path. Like, A&M can still win their way into the college football playoff. There's no doubt about it. So I'll say A&M quickly on that. But I also think, as much as I don't trust Lane Kiffin in big football games, man, the road is there. The road is long, many a winding road. But Ole Miss has got everything you could want in front of them runway-wise to find their way into the college football playoff, which is wild. And how many times last night on the ESPN broadcast did they point out, 2 losses, but by a total of however many points to 2 good teams like that? We're already trying to qualify the why and how of Ole Miss making it into the college football playoff. And frankly, I'm not sure how confident. Here's your hot take, I guess. I'm not sure how confident I am that Georgia's going to make this thing. I mean, they got to get through Ole Miss, Tennessee. Then they're going to have to, in theory, through all of this, they hope to make the SEC championship game. Like, I don't know how the SEC is going to shake out. And if Georgia doesn't play cleaner with the football, particularly Carson Beck, if their offense doesn't clean some things up, if they can't run the football better, I know right now everybody's going to tell me that they're highly ranked by the committee, but they've got a lot ahead of them that makes me particularly nervous. So I can see one of the outsides moving in and Georgia sitting there saying, what in the hell happened?
Georgia does have by far the toughest remaining strength of schedule. They are 5th in remaining strength of schedule. They're the only team that, as the current rankings sit, plays 2 ranked opponents coming up in back-to-back. Number 16th ranked Ole Miss who's one of the most talented teams in the SEC, and then number 7, Tennessee. And so you're right, Jason, being able to survive that gauntlet, Dad, for a team in Georgia that last year was like this up until the Auburn game. And in the second half, it clicked, and all of a sudden they started ripping off wins and becoming the team that eventually was going to go on to the SEC title that year. This year, we're still waiting for Georgia offensively to kick into gear. Injuries on the offensive line have certainly hurt that. But to Jason's point, they're playing a brand of football kind of like Miami, where they just keep letting teams hang around and keeping it close long enough to where against their schedule, they are definitely at risk.
So I wonder, Jason, how many two-loss teams you think get in? Right now, just Alabama is the only two-loss team in the top 12. But Texas A&M has 2 losses. They could get in. LSU has 2 losses. Ole Miss has 2 losses. Ohio State could have a second loss, and they're ranked second. Georgia could have a second loss. They're ranked third. Texas could have a second loss. They're ranked fifth. They're high enough in the rankings where maybe a second loss wouldn't knock them out of the top 12.
Yeah, and you're right. And that's one of the most – guys, I'm not sure right now. If I'm sitting here, for example, Penn State. Penn State has 1 loss. Penn State is looking around and saying, glory be to God. You know what we're not going to have to do? We're not going to have to play in the Big Ten championship game. Right. We ain't going to have to worry about picking up a second loss. So then all of a sudden, you could have an Ohio State pick up the second loss in the Big Ten championship game and then be like, well, wait a minute. That's not fair. You could have in Indiana sitting there saying, hey, we have 1 loss if they lose to Ohio State. Now all of a sudden you got Indiana and Penn State saying, no, we both belong with 1 loss. And Oregon picking up a second loss. The SEC could easily give us a 2-loss champion. They could easily give us a team that's coming out of this thing, out of that championship game with 2 losses. So I honestly believe at this point, the real line is 3. If you have 3 losses, you ain't getting in. I don't think 2 losses is going to prevent any team from getting into the college football playoff.
That becomes the most interesting part to me, and it's produced a delay in the knockout matches that we've seen now. LSU, Alabama finally has the feel that people have been searching for of, hey, one of these teams is going to come out of this with their playoff hopes more than likely eliminated. The conference championship route does create an interesting loophole that does keep more teams in this longer, which, again, is a net positive. Fitz, we talked a little bit about Indiana. Dad and I mentioned the Notre Dame of it all with the state of Indiana, but with IU themselves, clearly without a marquee win on their resume so far, but been so dominant, the committee respects that and puts them at number 8. Based on what you've seen, do you think they can beat Ohio State?
I admit my brand bias here. No, but it's partially because, look, you mentioned that strength of schedule. It's 103rd. They have the 103rd strength of schedule in the country right now. Like, they just haven't played anybody. And they've made it look really good along the way. That's fine. But, man, I just don't know. And Mike, you've talked a little bit about the line of scrimmage and where they can win in that. I got to see it. And the funny thing is, I don't think they have to beat Ohio State. I just think they can't get mauled by Ohio State, right? Like, if they go into Ohio State and if they go into that game and it's a close game, it's a 1-score game, I think they'll get a lot of benefit of the doubt for what they've done. If they go in and get beat by double digits, then it's easy the excuse. That's kind of where I feel like the committee was soft, and we talk about this a lot, where they're like, football will play itself out. Where they put them, it's going to be really easy to vault them up or really easy to kick them down. And I want to say they can be competitive. I also believe that offense just can't click against big boys.
How are we overlooking the possibility that Colorado may play in the Big 12 championship game? I said earlier, we talked about them a lot last year and they were bad, and we're not talking about them too much this year, and they're good with 2 of the best players in the country. Now, they need Iowa State to lose a game, but they could possibly be playing in the Big 12 championship.
Yeah, and if they play in the Big 12 championship game, I mean, as a dabbler, I wouldn't take my money against them in the Big 12 championship game. Like you mentioned, you talk about efficiency. They are playing with offensive efficiency that they didn't have last year. Their line has come together a lot better. Shedeur is not being asked to be as Herculean throughout the process of this. And their defense is opportunistic, let's say it that way. So, yeah, I think they have a real shot. Iowa State has not looked good for several games this season. So I think Colorado has a real shot to be playing in the Big 12 championship game, real shot at winning it, and real shot at finding themselves in the college football playoff, which is alarming to say considering how hard we've all been on Colorado.
It has been. It's been a remarkable turnaround. Legitimate good football team now. And as Deion Sanders has said less and less during the season, it seems that the people talking about it have also gotten less and less. We'll see if that changes up now. Then I think for everyone it's going to click. Hey, not only do they have a Heisman Trophy contender and could be too, but also a very viable path to the college football playoff now. Coming up next, Fitzy going to stick around with us a little bit and not only look at the trade deadline, but also some teams that might be looking ahead towards the draft. Who is in the pole position for the race to the bottom in the NFL? Next on GoJo and Golic. Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. Jason Fitz still with us here. You can catch him on Yahoo Sports Inside Coverage, breaking down everything from the NFL, which is good, Fitz, because we were handing out grades for the NFL trade deadline. We obviously had our favorites. A lot of them seem painfully obvious, given that good teams made moves to get better, which is usually a winning formula. Do you have a favorite move that you saw from this, we'll say last week or so, the lead up to the trade deadline, as much as the umpteenth hour where we saw some guys wheeling and dealing as well yesterday?
We'll get to why I hated the Cowboys in a second. We all did. But if we're talking about moves that I loved, it's funny. When we were recording Inside Coverage a couple of weeks ago, we were about to start recording the episode. We record every Wednesday. And DeAndre Hopkins had just been traded to the Chiefs. And so you guys know me. We've worked together for years. I'm getting all my notes together. As we start that podcast taping, I say to Jory, our expert, I start the show with, on an honest moment in this pod, we were about to tape, we delayed the whole thing, had to blow the whole rundown up because we had a mega trade. DeAndre Hopkins headed to the Chiefs. And Jory Epstein, our one of our insiders, laughed at me on the pod. It was like, I love your salesmanship, but let's not call this a mega trade. And I fought back on it at the time. I stand by that now. Like, you gave an offense and an offensive coordinator, an experienced wide receiver that knows how to absorb an offense quickly, that understands how to translate quickly, that is now going to be working with the quarterback that hasn't had that safety net guy at a wide receiver position this year that he can really count on. I just think that's huge. I know that we gloss over it because we want to tell you that the Chiefs are broken every week. They're undefeated for a reason. And you've given them a wide receiver that, frankly, now you combine him with Kelsey. Like, the two of them together are going to be really tough to stop. I don't know why we glossed over DeAndre Hopkins because his numbers were bad with the Titans. Let's remember, A.J. Brown got away from the Titans and looked even better. Derrick Henry got away from the Titans and suddenly was like, oh, Derrick Henry wasn't broken. The Titans suck. And now all of a sudden DeAndre Hopkins gets away from the Titans. It's like, here's a theme. When you leave Nashville, you can actually still put up productive numbers for a team that can win.
Says a guy who's sitting in Nashville right now, just miffed at his team.
I just think it's wild. Like, I do think it's wild. As much as we yell about the Cowboys not signing Derrick Henry, not finding a way to get Derrick Henry, let's acknowledge, again, the Titans let him walk out the door. Like, you could make an argument right now that Derrick Henry is the NFL MVP, and he's running like he's 10 years younger than he is, with a burst of fire that is absolutely unstoppable. And how did he get out the door for $5.1 million? That's his cap number this year, $5.1 million. Talk about the fact the Cowboys didn't sign him, fine. But talk about the fact that Rand Carthon, the GM of the Titans, sat around with him in the building and said, nah, we don't need him. We'll be fine. And it's not like they knew they were in rebuild mode because they went out and got other weapons. So this was just a flat out error by a bad football team that doesn't deserve to win football games because they constantly screw everything up.
I will say, not in defense of the Titans, but in an acknowledgement of what we've talked about with running back, as we've seen Saquon leave the Giants and go have success in Philadelphia. These guys, to your point, we're not going to have that success with their current team. I doubt Derrick Henry has this success with the Dallas Cowboys, given the issues that they've had with an offensive line churning, with the rookies up front, with the way they run offense there. In general, Derrick Henry probably would have been better in Dallas, but it wouldn't look like it does now, where you've got likely the MVP in the backfield next to what could be the ground player of the year or the offensive player of the year, however you divvy that up when award season goes out. It certainly helped there. But you're right, Jason. It all underscores the fact that DeAndre Hopkins is another adult in the room that the Chiefs desperately needed. When you looked at that receiver room, that's why Juju Smith-Schuster had the big game before he got hurt, because he's an adult veteran player in the room that understands his fit in that offense, that was breaking in new guys again that Mahomes was having some trouble with. The reason for all the interceptions is a guy taking chances on guys that aren't ready to capitalize on those chances yet. We saw it plain as day, in plain letter, when they had a wide-open deep pass schemed up for Xavier Worthy, who couldn't get both feet down in bounds, backing up in a way that a veteran receiver would, and then later in the game, watch DeAndre Hopkins make those trust plays with Pat. So I'm with you. That's a move that went undersold because DeAndre Hopkins is 32 years old. He's on the wrong side of 30 at a position where we generally start to see that sort of wear on guys. Jason, is there any player you were surprised that didn't get moved? As we talked about, some of the pass rushers still available, the quarterbacks, the young ones like Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson. Did you ever entertain the thought that either of those two specifically would get moved before the deadline?
I didn't, only because, if we're being honest for a second, this year's quarterback class, as we've said for months, is not very good in the draft, right? So if you're the Carolina Panthers and you're looking around saying, man, Bryce Young ain't it, we might have the first pick overall in this draft, I don't know that you can even remotely start to begin to think about drafting Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders first. Like, I talked to a couple of guys that I think are smart with the draft, and I asked them all the same question. Whoever your top quarterback is in this year's draft, where would they have ranked in last year's draft? And everybody I've talked to and asked that specific question to has given me the same answer: 6th, behind Bo Nix. So the general consensus right now, whether you love Garrett Nussmeier, whether you love Shedeur Sanders, whether you love Cam Ward, is that in last year's quarterback class, it would have been the 6th best quarterback. So, like, that's not worth leveraging your future on. So if you're the Colts, if you're the Panthers, I just don't think you have a viable answer coming in this year's draft. So you're better off holding the young guy, seeing if you can develop anything, trying to figure out a good veteran situation to help bridge the gap. And next year, when you're picking in the top few picks of the draft, you're going to have to go with a different position because there just isn't going to be a quarterback out there that can save you.
With that in mind, I think this is an interesting time to shift our focus to where the arrow has been pointed down. Because I don't know if you guys are aware, this weekend in the NFL, we've got a very important game that's getting ready to happen. The NFL is heading to Germany once again this weekend to play a football game as they continue to try for their world domination. And they are sending the New York Giants to play the Carolina Panthers in what has been looking like an NFL sickos game for a while. And Jesse, this got us thinking about what the bottom of the NFL looks like heading towards the draft that Fitz just laid out for us.
Yeah, so we think about this and we're like, oh my God, these are only 2-win teams. How can we be sending them over to Germany? But they're not alone. 9 teams with only 2 wins. That's crazy to think about. But what we want to know is, like, are all 9 of these teams the same? Do you know what I mean? Pretty clear the Panthers, despite that win that they had on Sunday, are back in contention for the number 1 pick. Now they have a head-to-head versus the Saints. Like, it's craziness right here. So how about we go through and do a little, like, contender or pretender? So we have these 9 teams. They all only have 2 wins. But let me know what you think, if they're contenders or pretenders. How about the Panthers? Are they really the worst of the worst? What do we think?
Oh, yeah. I think from a talent standpoint, they have the least amount of talent. And right now, where they currently sit, they would have the 2nd pick. I think a way to look at it, I definitely think they're the worst team. But you're right, Jesse, 9 2-win teams. But the way you look at it is, we know what fans will think. Fans will say, well, just lose the games and get the top draft pick, because you have 9 2-loss teams. How about being the team like Tennessee right now, continuing with Tennessee, Jason? They would pick the 9th out of the 9 teams. I mean, how awful would that be for you, that you're one of the worst teams and you would still pick 9th? But I think you have to look at who needs quarterbacks. So right now in the order of picks, New England would be 1. They don't need a quarterback. Jacksonville would be 2. They don't need a quarterback. New Orleans would be 3. They do. 4 Carolina does. 5 Cleveland does. 6 Las Vegas does. 7 Giants, yes. 8 Miami, no. And 9 Tennessee. Are they going to hang on to Will Levis, or are they moving on? So that's how I think you break this down on who actually needs the most overpicked and overvalued position in the draft, the quarterback.
This
Fitz,
is what sucks,
let me ask
guys.
you this. Okay, go for it, Fitz. Go.
This sucks. I'm just being real. When you are in a division like my favorite team is, and you're taking on Mahomes and Justin Herbert, and maybe Bo Nix, I don't necessarily know, and you're taking on 3 epic coaches. And I genuinely believe by the end of the year, there are going to be teams that finish with 4 wins that have the 8th or 9th pick. There's that many bad teams. This is not going to normalize itself. So all of a sudden, your team finishes 4-13, and you're in a year that doesn't have a good quarterback prospect, and also you have the 8th pick. Like, what in the hell are you supposed to do with that? Like, it's just like, I always say better to be lucky than good. Sometimes you're just flat out unlucky. This is a bad year to need a quarterback and suck, because you can't suck enough to even get a quarterback. And even if you did, this isn't the type of, there isn't a Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, a Drake May in this draft class. There just isn't. That's why some people reported that there were that teams like the Raiders offered as many as 3 first-round picks to try and move up with Washington. And Washington said, nope, we're taking Jaden Daniels. Now you know why, because NFL teams scout the quarterback position in 2-year blocks. So everybody last year that was looking at a quarterback knew that this year's draft class sucked, and now you're still stuck. You're stuck.
I do think it's interesting looking, and let's use a team like Carolina as an example, where they're in a spot where a lot of these teams that we're talking about sitting here with 2 wins, you look at them, you look at the New England Patriots, teams that have new coaches on teams that are here. So likely coaches that are going to be around here, but are also working through different quarterback situations. For New England, hey, you've got hope. You got your quarterback in Drake May, and when he's been on the field and healthy, on a team that really is devoid of talent in front of him and around him at receiver, he's managed to be the rose that blooms from the concrete. In some of these other situations, Tennessee is in a really interesting spot because the defense has been playing great this year, but you didn't bring your coach, Brian Callahan, over here to coach the defense. But in a draft class where you don't have a quarterback, hey, Will Levis could be just enough to hold on through a year and use that draft capital to fortify another position. That's quite honestly, guys, what I look at Carolina with the Panthers and wonder, you brought Dave Canales down here to be the guy that helps the quarterback out and tries to revitalize that. And if you go back and look, I get it was against the Saints, and I get we're looking for glimmers of hope, but Bryce Young's come back now because of the injury to Andy Dalton. And last weekend, I started to squint and go, all right, there's some good stuff here, actually. Bryce Young started to look a little bit more like an NFL quarterback in this game. The numbers don't beguile all of it because there were some bad drops in there on good balls that he put in his receivers' hands. And so you start to wonder, hey, if you can see enough from Bryce Young, who I think it's important that he's playing down the stretch of a season. For Carolina as the example of this, you're the franchise that under David Tepper has become the poster for churning and burning much too fast and working through coaches, quarterbacks, important personnel here in a way that's not sustainable. You could actually hold on to a guy, try and build out the rest of this roster, use the rookie contract to your advantage until you get to more viable quarterback classes and are then forced to make the decision. Like, I think Bryce Young could be the starting quarterback for them still next year, potentially.
I love the way you laid that out, Mike, because the best case scenario for most teams right now that suck isn't going back to the draft to get a quarterback next year. It's finding a way to get the quarterback you have to at least stop the bleeding long enough for you to build the rest of the roster around them. And I genuinely believe this is a good draft for building roster depth. This is a good draft for finding position players in other spots, and you can really help your team. We're just so quarterback obsessed that everybody thinks, well, you know what? I'm going to get Jaden Daniels. And once I have Jaden Daniels, my team's going to win a lot of football games. If that's not there, then the best case scenario is, you know what? Bryce Young is going to just hold the fort down. And by the way, we're going to worry about the rest of the 53. We're going to get better everywhere else. And we're going to continue to do that year in and year out until we can grab the quarterback that can actually help us, much like the 49ers did for a long time. Remember, the 49ers, they addressed other needs year in and year out to the point that when they finally took a swing at a quarterback and they missed, they didn't even get fired for it. They missed on a trade up for a quarterback because they built the rest of the roster around that quarterback.
So Mike, under your scenario, and I like the scenario with the lack of quarterback coming out in this draft, does a team like New Orleans look for a quarterback or stick with Derek Carr because of the money? A team like the Giants, do they stick with their quarterback? A team like Tennessee, you just mentioned, is sticking with their quarterback? How about Vegas got to get a quarterback. Cleveland's got to get a quarterback. There are some teams that just have to. But how about the teams that are kind of on a fence? Do you just hold off another year?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, and I even, heat checking myself with the Panthers take, it requires Bryce Young to keep making progress towards the end of the season off of what we saw there. Because if you're the Panthers right now, you're the worst team in terms of point differential in the NFL. There's a real chance you could be in range for the number one overall pick. And if that's the case, you're probably going to take one of the quarterbacks in this spot. I know people talk about Will Johnson as the best player in this draft, the cornerback out of Michigan, but I still look at this situation and go, if you see some positive stuff there, yeah, you're right, though. The Raiders, Fitzy, I mean, based on your guys' situation and how dire that seems, something's going to have to change for them, and quarterback's number one on the list.
I always say you can't use scratch-off lottery tickets to pay your mortgage. It's not a way to do it. And a lot of times that's what teams try to do in the draft. Sometimes you are so screwed, you got no choice but to go to the gas station, buy a bunch of them, and hope and pray. And that's where the Raiders are now. They're just going to drive to the gas station, can't pay the mortgage. We're going to scratch these off, and we're going to hope like hell I'm wrong, and one of these finally finds a way to pay off.
I do love scratch-off lottery tickets. Do love hanging out with Jason Fitz on a Wednesday. Check Fitzy out over at Yahoo Sports, doing a phenomenal job. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate you.
Appreciate you, boys.
Coming up next, did the NBA actually help out the 76ers? We'll talk about it on GoJo and Golic.
back to GoJo and Golic. Jesse Cofield, Mike Golic Jr. and Mike Golic Sr. here. Guys, we got to talk about some news in the NBA. NBA handing down a 3-game suspension for Joel Embiid for his altercation with a reporter. If you recall, he shoved said reporter after the reporter had written an article that mentioned his deceased brother and his son. Not great, but apparently, guys, they're going to deem Joel Embiid ready to return tonight. So his 3-game suspension will now begin. All of a sudden, he's ready to return. So he'll serve the suspension now, and we'll have to wait a little longer to see him on the court. But is that, I mean, how do we feel about the 3 games and the timing of suddenly he's ready to go tonight?
Boy, God's timing is truly perfect, isn't it? He is miraculously healed. He will serve his suspension, and then he will return for the Philadelphia 76ers. Dad, it's almost like the NBA did the 76ers a favor here. This reminds me a lot of when you'd see pitchers get suspended for throwing at batters in Major League Baseball, and they'd suspend them for 3 games knowing that they're going to rest the next 3 before they're back up in the rotation and be on their merry way.
Yeah. It's one thing about Embiid, he's going to miss, they're 1-5, so he's going to miss the first 9 games. So he's already has only 8 more as a cushion to be eligible for the MVP, which I don't think he cares about. But, I mean, he's going to get to that 65-game threshold pretty quickly at the rate he's missing games. But, yeah, listen, it's smart smart by Philadelphia to deem him healthy. That means he misses the next 3 games. And they listen, at some point they got to get him back on the court. I mean, I know it's early, but, you fall into a hole early. Paul George starting to play and knock some of the rust off. So Embiid's got to get out there. They got to get some time together with the 3 of them.
Yeah, I think this is one of those rare everybody wins suspensions, because if you're the NBA, while we both talked about this, Joel Embiid, you'd be hard-pressed if you had said the things about me that reporter did in that article to not have you feeling the same type of way that Joel Embiid did there.
Yep.
It's a defensible source of frustration, but if you're the NBA, you can't have players getting into physical altercations with the media. You just can't set that kind of precedent. So something was always going to happen here, and for it to be 3 games for a player that's still ramping back up to play coming off a knee injury that had somewhat of an ambiguous timeline that just so happens to now line up perfectly with how they want to get him back out there to play, it does seem like everybody is sort of going to come out of this unscathed.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and then hopefully he remains healthy. Hopefully Paul George for Philadelphia, that they both stay healthy as the season goes on. And I don't know. I had high hopes for Philadelphia, but obviously you knew these guys wouldn't make it through the entire season. But the bumpy start at the beginning of the season, Tyrese Maxey has to be like, gang, you're going to join me at any point here? Do I just have to keep having the weight of the team on my shoulders?
Yeah, and thankfully everyone involved got handsomely paid, especially, including Tyrese Maxey. But, Dad, I think the difference for me with Philadelphia, who's sitting there at 1-5, versus a team like Milwaukee, who's also come out of the gates and been incredibly disappointing so far this season, is Milwaukee's had their guys. I mean, outside of the loss to Cleveland where it was Dame Lillard versus the world as Giannis was on the bench, that one as they, load manage the way they do stars for the rest of the NBA. But they've had their roster available to them, and it's looked like a disaster to the point where Giannis Antetokounmpo trade rumors have been getting started. For Philadelphia, you're 1-5, but yeah, you just got Paul George back, who had clear rust to knock off of after an injury that, lest we not forget, Joel Embiid is dealing with an injury that's been a lot more long-term that he had to manage even during the Olympic cycle. For Paul George, that popped up at the end of training camp. That was a fresh wound that he's knocking rust off of, in addition to being an older player. You still haven't had the core of your roster out there yet on a long season. So if I'm Philadelphia, I'm not sounding alarms by any means.
Yeah, I mean, but we did say that about Milwaukee last year, especially with Chris Middleton. I know he's sliding from a big 3 talk with Dame and Giannis, but we kept saying, wait till they're all together, wait till they're all together. They never really all got together. So you're going to have to kind of show the 76ers, are going to have to kind of show everybody that, hey, we can play together for a majority of the games this year to show what they can do.
they can, but they're at least it's my favorite reference. It's Schrodinger's cat. We don't really know yet because we haven't opened up the box with the 76ers the same way that we have with them. Now, the interesting part of this is that based on the way this is going to line up, that first game back for Joel Embiid is going to be, albeit at home, but against the New York Knicks, a team where Karl Anthony Towns has come over and already put up some big-time numbers and is expected to be one of the bigs in the Eastern Conference that helps a team like New York contend with a guy like Joel Embiid. Now, playing very different styles in games. Karl hardly lives in the paint as much as Joel, although we've seen some of that with him over the years. Going to be an interesting crucible for Joel to make his return coming back where, hey, you're going to get tested. Cat can space the floor and run the floor. And for a guy in Joel Embiid who is coming back off this, the conditioning is going to be interesting to watch, and just how that knee holds up against a team in New York that can absolutely grind you down. Yeah, looking at a couple of trends early in the season, you see the trend of the three-point shot could be at an historic high. Obviously, the Celtics lead. I think 42% of their shots have been threes. Oh, that's the league. The league is shooting 42% threes, which would surpass the 40% mark in the 21-22 season. So that's still the trend in the NBA to hoist up threes. That haven't changed. And I think one thing that is kind of warms my heart is we talk about the Defensive Player of the Year with Wembanyama and Chet Holmgren kind of battling for that. Oklahoma City's defense is a throwback to my era of watching the NBA when I was playing ball in the 80s and the 90s. They're like 9 points lower than the next closest team on holding defense or teams to points. I think they're holding teams to under 96 points a game, 8 fewer than any other team. So I'm actually loving seeing, we talk about them, as one of the top teams, if not the top team in the West. So I really kind of like that trend, more along the lines of when I was growing up watching defensive ball.
Yeah, they undefeated along with the Cleveland Cavaliers, their counterpart in the Eastern Conference, and exactly doing what they expected to do, Dad, a team that is still, and I think the perfect combination as we look towards things like the in-season tournament of young enough to devote energy to this time of year. This right. Oklahoma City core has not yet stacked a bunch of deep postseason runs on a veteran roster in a way where they've got to start to manage their bodies during the season a little bit differently. And so they've got all of this energy. They've got the defensive effort that lends itself well to capturing something like the in-season tournament that prioritizes the beginning portion of this season. So they're going to be interesting. And that, man, Dad, the injury couldn't have come at a worse time for Anthony Davis, because if we're looking at the Western Conference and this sort of antidote stylistically to three-point ball that's been proliferating the NBA, that started with the Warriors and James Harden in Houston and now has gone through to its final form in the Boston Celtics, the leading points per game scorer in the NBA had been Anthony Davis through the first 7-8 games of the season for the Los Angeles Lakers. And while the injury now is what you always fear with him, I really want to see this play out over a long sample size, because this is not only just, hey, what are the Lakers going to accomplish in the twilight years of LeBron James, but this is always what we've wondered. Is this a guy that's capable of taking the baton and being the future for this organization? Talent-wise, always been capable of playing MVP caliber ball, but just never been able to do it over long enough stretches. And coming out of the gate this hot, again, we've ridden the roller coaster with him during the postseason where it's 30-point outing, 10-point outing, 28-point outing, 15-point outing. If Anthony Davis could consistently be this guy, boy, does this change a lot for the Los Angeles Lakers.
Yeah, it does, but you're just holding your breath, right? I mean, he's 31, but what is that age in big man NBA age? It's older than that.
Sure.
And he gets nicked up and he misses games. So we go through a whole regular season, but what are we talking about with the Sixers? You can say the same thing with the Lakers is how healthy will they be when the regular season's over, when you go to the playoffs? That's the key. You're kind of just meandering through the regular season, maybe hoping not to be a play-in team to actually make the playoffs, but do you have all your guys healthy? And that's always been a question with the Lakers and certainly with Embiid with the Sixers.
Certainly health been one of the big storylines throughout the early portion of the season, with some of the biggest stars around the league missing games. Coming up next, we'll see if we can attribute any of that to Ouija board nonsense here in This, That, and the Third to finish off the show. All right, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, the third. 3 quick stories to send you to the rest of the day. Make sure you download, subscribe, rate, and review the show. Leave us a 5-star rating. Check us out live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. And if you miss us there or any of our great guests, shout out to Jessica Smetana from the Levitard Show joining us in hour number 1, and our buddy Jason Fitz from Yahoo Sports joining us in hour number 2. You can catch both of those interviews wherever you get your podcast or right here on YouTube as soon as we get done with the show. This segment, This, That, and the Third, is brought to you by Knockaround. Head on over to knockaround.com and use code GoJo Golic to pick up your new go-to pair of polarized shades. As always, we like to model in this segment here. I have really been enjoying this pair. So I had been rocking with, the Torrey Pines that I think Dad's wearing right now for a while. You've got the Campiones that Jesse has there, that riding down the ski slopes to be a Bond villain in an 80s movie. But I went with the bright sides here, and I'm a big head guy, and these are really built well for a person with a dome of my stature. And so if you found yourself having to get fitted for an extra large helmet ever in your life or wearing hats above 7 3/4, might I recommend the bright sides to you. They work very well for people who have a lot of dome to work with. So head on over to knockaround.com. Again, the promo code is GoJo Golic. That's GoJoGolic, and get yours today. Great polarized shades that won't break the bank. Guys, let's start off with This, That, and the Third with an airport raccoon. Apparently, over the weekend at LaGuardia, the airport went into a tizzy as a raccoon suddenly fell through the ceiling. The TikTok clip, unsurprisingly, shows the raccoon trying to pull off what looks like a movie heist scene rappelling down from the ceiling. Where else but in front of the Spirit Airlines counter? I, for one, am shocked, guys.
It says that people went running and screaming from the situation, and my vibe is just, if you're flying Spirit, you gotta be made of stronger stuff than that. If the raccoon is gonna freak you out that much, you are at the wrong airline.
I agree. Absolutely agree. Yeah, if you're stepping on a Spirit airline, then you got to have some cojones. So a raccoon should not bug you at all. But it's a raccoon in an unexpected place. So maybe there was a deal on the Spirit Airlines and he was trying to get on board. Who knows?
Yeah, that could be true. Maybe
that
he
is
was
true.
a passenger.
And if that raccoon wants to go down to Panama City Beach, then by God, it should be able to go down and enjoy itself for spring break like everybody else, even though it's the middle of fall. I was impressed by the dexterity. I know outdoor creatures, they crawl all sorts of places, and Lord knows raccoons are notorious for getting into spots that they're not supposed to be with their wee beady hands that they use to scoop things with. But this one being able to full-on hold itself upside down, I actually had to applaud the raccoon a little bit. That's a good job, kitty.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't hold on for very long, and he didn't seem like, how cats always land on their feet. He looked like he went down. He hit it. But I read the article, and it says that animal control came and found him and released him outside. So hopefully he doesn't find his way back inside anytime soon.
Well, I'm glad it ended better for him than the squirrel. I mean, geez, oh man. I mean, rest in peace.
Rest in peace to Peanut, man. That
Peanut.
was gross,
wow.
the way they did Peanut and the raccoon that was also in possession there.
Wait, what? What happened to Peanut?
They euthanized Peanut.
They euthanized
My God!
him.
What?
Yeah.
Yes.
They killed Peanut?
Yes.
Peanut and the raccoon, right?
Oh, God. Fred, too?
Yeah.
Oh.
How about that?
Oh, God.
Yeah.
No.
It's a bad time out here. People need to be brought to justice in that situation because it is quite, and I mean this sincerely, despicable the way that went down with those two animals. So glad that the raccoon at LaGuardia was at least taken care of in a much more humane way than what we witnessed in that entire ordeal. Let's move away from animal cruelty and Jesse towards what Saquon Barkley did on the football field again this weekend. I'm glad that there's been a cottage industry of content coming off of this that is well worn into this week, where we've seen alternate angles, the Eagles' sideline reactions, now apparently full-blown reenactments of one of the greatest plays I've ever seen.
Yeah, former Eagle Freddie Mitchell decided to reenact the play in a checks and notes Lowe's. He was in a Lowe's. So this sounds like a game of Clue, right? Freddie Mitchell at Lowe's with a paint roller. And there he is. Look at him go, reenacting this. So the real question is, where is former Eagle Mike Golic going to reenact this? Huh?
Listen,
what do we think?
I would probably work my way through a buffet line. I would think that would be the way to go.
Okay.
To spin around somebody, to cut in line, and then to jump over a small child, have to be a very, 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 very small child because my hops are not that good. But spin around an adult, backward hop over a child, and all of a sudden be in the front of the line at a buffet, I think would be the way to go.
Wow.
But I would, jumping backwards, I couldn't have done it when I was supposedly an athlete, let alone try to reenact it now. I would hurt myself. And to see the reaction of your peers, these are other men in the NFL who have made it to the NFL, who play in the NFL, just in utter amazement at what they saw, which we all were. But when, when you're on the same level as he is, sometimes you'd be like, oh, well, but when you see something that makes your peers lose their mind, or just Jordan Davis, number 90, him just walking away, shaking his head was the best reaction.
Cooper DeJean sitting there with his head in his hands, utterly befuddled that the human body can create such miracles. And you're right. These guys are the 1%. The 1% of guys from high school that make it to the college level, the 1% of guys that make it from the college level to the NFL, and he just saw the peak at the mountaintop. Mount Olympus itself gave them Saquon Barkley to go do things like that. And everyone, you're right, that to me is the ultimate showcase. Nakobe Dean, there was great mic'd up audio of him on the sideline talking about that play. The best athletes in the world looked at what Saquon Barkley did and said, no, God spent a little bit more time on you. Speaking of forces from the great beyond, Jesse, let's get to the third here. I'm always interested in signs because, as one of my friends often pointed out when we saw a sign asking people to not poop in the alley in Amsterdam, you knew the backstory meant enough people had to have pooped in the alley to necessitate a sign. We've got another interesting one that popped up at a restaurant.
Yeah, so a restaurant has this sign on their door, okay? So it says, due to recent events, Ouija boards are no longer permitted on the patio. And the question is, what the heck were the recent events that led to a banning of Ouija boards? Did they literally summon a spirit on the patio at this restaurant and did it wreak havoc? What happened?
I don't know, man, because Dad, and I know you're not a very superstitious man, and in most cases I am not. Ouija boards are the one thing I will not touch. I've got no desire to crack open the door for this paranormal opportunity that's presented itself in plenty of. I pride myself on being the kind of white person that does not recreate the moments that we normally see from white people in horror films who want to split up or who want to open the Ouija board or do any number of dumb things that ultimately get you got and everyone got in these settings.
So, listen, I believe in aliens. I believe it's ridiculous to think that we're the only beings in the entire universe. And I'd like to believe that there are spirits out there. Obviously with good spirits comes bad spirits. I don't necessarily believe in Ouija boards because it's, again, people have their hands on something and all it takes is a couple of people to be on the same page to kind of guide the thing on the Ouija board, whatever you call it, to the letters that would make it look like there is a spirit. But I tend to believe there are good spirits and there are bad spirits. But you're right, Jesse. What happened? What happened on the patio? Did they believe they summoned a spirit? Was it a good spirit? Was it a bad spirit? Did people flip out? I have no idea, but I would like to know what caused that sign to go up.
Well, you know what? Where I think we're at is we need to get a Ouija board and we need to contact Peanut and just make sure everything's okay, because apparently we need to get in touch with the spirits from beyond.
And apparently Peanut, or maybe have that raccoon rappel in from the ceiling and steal the security cam footage from that restaurant to show us whatever the hell. Was there Ouija board night at this restaurant? We have questions that need answers. And hopefully someone out there can get them to us so that we don't have to summon spirits, because I am greatly afraid of that, as previously stated. What I'm not afraid of is you downloading, subscribing, rating, and reviewing this show, leaving it a 5-star rating, and checking us out live here Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on the DraftKings Network. Thanks so much. We'll talk to y'all tomorrow.